we're going to talk about systematic capability. It's probably a topic that a lot of people come across, but not a lot of detail out there in terms of what it actually means with regards to functional safety. So hopefully at the end of today, you'll have a better idea, and we can have a few questions that will help us frame what we've covered today. So you've kind of heard the introduction from Dave, and we're going to get straight through technical delivery, and then we'll go to question and answers. You can present questions on the chat or directly to Dave or myself, and we'll try to cover as many as we can at the end. I'm not going to do any sales pitch for ESC, so you know where I work if you want to look for it. We do this type of stuff, and this type of stuff tends to be a lot of the related subjects as well. Those who know me know what we do. Those who don't know me, it's a good opportunity after this to go and find out. Dave kind of introduced me quite well, quite detailed. The key thing I wanted to say is my experience in broader asset management links to this systematic capability discussion quite well. And later on, we'll get into why those two bridges come together quite well. So let's get into it. So we're going to try and discuss how numbers are just a part of safety considerations, and systemically managing risk through the life cycle of an asset, an installation, or a safety system using the relevant standards, the 61508 to 61511, is much more than just the numbers. And the way we're going to do that today is split into three parts. We're going to talk about risk targets a bit, just to create the context and what they actually tell us. We're then going to talk about systematic capability in the context of functional safety, covering life cycle and what systematic safety integrity levels mean and some other concepts. And then at the end, we're going to talk, is this really just about functional safety, or does it kind of transcend functional safety into risk management? So let's get started. Right, so hopefully the majority of you in your day-to-day job, in one way or another, you'll come across risk targets. You'll be told that there's certain acceptable levels of risk with tasks, activities, even systems you have on site, and those risk targets are there to give you guidance on what's acceptable and what's not. And one of the aspects I always like to not debate, but kind of put it at the forefront of these discussions is how do you use your risk targets every day, and how much do you believe they actually reflect reality? We've all come across a number of techniques and tools to quantify or frame risk discussions, and we all have that kind of focus that if there's a level of risk that's acceptable and a level of risk that isn't acceptable, we should be trying to achieve the lowest level of risk possible, or as the HSE has taught us, as low as reasonably practicable. But when we're talking about targets, we're talking about risk levels, we're talking about things that we do every day, and we're talking about having to consider these parameters in our activities, the way we design things, the way we create procedures, everything that we do. We often miss the actual aspect of risk targets and what they're there to do. I don't know about you guys, but I often ask, why is there a target? Why is it a target to us? Is that the correct target for us? How accurate do we need to be with regards to meeting that target? Is it important? Does one order of magnitude make a big difference in reality? And that really kind of puts things into perspective when we start looking at numbers versus what the real life is actually asking us to do. So I take it back to principles, and I try to break down where these definitions come from and try to understand them. So the CCPS, the Center for Chemical Process Safety, definition of risk target is an objective-based risk criteria established as goals or guidelines for performance. So you could interpret that as a goal for risk performance, and a goal is typically defined as an aim or purpose. Now, if we break down those sentences to its components, an objective, if it's objective based, it infers that there's a clear deliverable, that you are expected to deliver something that confirms you've met that objective. If there's a goal, that infers that you need to aim. There's an aspirational nature to having a goal. You're driving towards something. If there's a guideline, there's going to be interpretation of whatever that guideline says and how it actually fits in our day-to-day. And invariably, performance infers variability, because as we look at the deliverables that we have to produce to achieve that goal, as we're aiming towards that goal, and we're using the guidelines to get there, we are going to, each one of us, interpret those in a certain way based on our constraints, whether they're personal, professional, societal. And this is already showing that, wait a minute, if we have a risk target, there's already a number of things that are telling us that, one, it's variable, two, it might not be as clear cut as we would like it to be, three, there's a whole lot of context associated with what the risk target means to each one of us. So if that's the case, how do we deal with that? Well, one concept that's associated with risk targets and risk management on any company or any business or even in day-to-day life is risk reduction. You go from a level of risk that you deem to be unacceptable to a level of risk that you deem to be acceptable, and that journey is the journey of risk reduction. So why do we need to know how much risk reduction we require? And again, same questions. And how do we actually use that every day? And does it actually reflect the reality of what we're doing? So, for example, when we determine a SIL target for a safety instrumented function, we're determining the amount of risk reduction required to take a particular system that's being considered from a level of risk that we deem to be unacceptable or fairly close to an unacceptable level into an area that we feel is more acceptable and manageable. And we do that by understanding what measures we have, what contribution they bring into that journey of risk reduction, and how close do they get us from achieving that goal, from hitting that target, which means that risk reduction is actually a fairly complex set of data, which includes not only the hard and fast numbers, but it also includes a number of assumptions and engineering judgment, etc. We've all come across the techniques to do this. You've seen fault tree analysis, hopefully. It can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, just with logic relations. You've seen models that look at dispersion of substances, whether they're toxic or flammable or not, or could be dispersion for understanding of other things. And you've probably seen event trees. All these things are trying to help us understand the journey of risk reduction and how closely it actually gets us to the target, the goal that we've established, with a fairly heavy amount of operational experience, hopefully, and in a way that reflects our own reality, our own context, which takes us all the way back to the beginning of the presentation when I said risk targets are likely to be interpreted, addressed, and provide context in different ways to each one of us. So for all this level of uncertainty, and I'm kind of in a way playing the devil's advocate here, saying maybe it's not as clear cut as we'd like it to be, but we need to do something. And currently there's a number of ways that you can estimate risk reduction, typically associated with frequencies of failure, probability of failure on demand, might be risk levels, might be risk gaps identified in a more qualitative way. It might be specific integrity levels. It might be just a comparison between a couple of numbers, the acceptable risk level versus current risk. And we do that by trying to understand how those barriers that we looked at, that journey of risk reduction, how each one of those milestones in that journey contributes to that reduction, how they can do their job or how they can fail to do that job, and prevent us from having that successful outcome to reaching that goal. And it could be that you're looking at reliability data. It could be that you're looking at how you look after equipment and the type of maintenance you have. All these things have an impact on how you actually make decisions. And the risk that you're trying to manage, that journey of risk reduction, typically depends and influences decisions like, shall you continue operating? Shall you shut down? Are you going to operate in a degraded mode? Do you have to put additional measures in place? Or right at the beginning, when you're thinking of a new bit of technology that we all get very excited about, how does that actually translate to successfully taking you from that journey of risk reduction that you're aspiring to go through and achieve your target? The same with an expansion or growth or investment that you're looking at. Is that going to increase your risk and put you in a situation where you're potentially accepting higher levels of risk because of not just the equipment you're selecting, but the type of stuff you're doing or the amount of inventory you're accepting? All these decisions have to do with risk and have to do with that journey and have to do with that risk target, that criteria, that number that we put a lot of faith in. And that model that gives us a number as a target gives us that warm fuzzy feeling that if we reach that number, everything's okay. So for all of you guys that kind of nodding and going, yeah, that number, know the number, makes me feel comfortable. I'll give you this this quote from Pythagoras. Number is the ruler of forms and ideas and the cause of gods and demons. The reality is putting all your eggs in the quantitative side of the risk management aspects of your plant, of your system, is likely to give you some really good data or some really good prompts to look at data, but it might actually lead you to miss some really important stuff. So let's kind of talk a bit about that. I've and most of you guys hopefully have come across these next points, but I had a bit of a review of known real world incident cases, and I picked up 4, tried to be as diverse with regards to the cases as possible to contextualize what we're going to talk about. And I've picked up 4: BP Texas, the overfill scenario that ended up with an explosion and fatalities. Bonesfield Storage, no fatalities, but one of the biggest process safety incidents in the history of process industry. Flixborough, the explosion at Flixborough, which caused some fatalities, widespread damage, and ended up shutting down the site. And the odd one in, which is Boeing 737 MAX, the issues with the actual stall control. And the reason why I looked at these, I wanted to look at risk targets, and I wanted to look at demonstration of risk reduction. You know, that warm fuzzy feeling when we say well, if I have a SIL1 function with a PFD of 2.6 e to the minus 2, and with our relief valve, that gives us 0.01 risk reduction, we go from having an acceptable level risk to a acceptable level risk. Yay, everything's okay. So I wanted to look at that. I wanted to see in these ones, where did the numbers play a part? And I extracted some of the root causes that were identified with these incidents. And it was a sobering discussion. So for BP Texas, alarm management, maintenance of safety critical equipment, and human factors were quoted as the main root causes. Okay. For Buncefield, specification and maintenance of safety critical equipment, high reliability organizations, also maintenance of safety critical equipment, also human factors. Okay. Flixborough, heavily management of change, again, human factors, competence management, high reliability organization issues there as well. Right. And then I thought the odd one is, aviation. I'm going to find it there. And the root cause was management of change, software validation issues, and poor specification. Now that they understand a bit better, poor specification of what the function was actually supposed to do. Brilliant. I learned quite a lot about these incidents, but where are the numbers? Where's the warm fuzzy feeling that wasn't achieved by these companies or by these systems that justify all the effort that we put on calculating PFDs and getting headaches trying to meet that target? So at this point, as a true engineering and functional safety engineer, I'm scratching my head going, this is interesting. There's no PFDs quoted as an issue. There's no reliability data quoted as an issue. There's no unexpected failure modes associated with characteristics of materials as an issue. Okay, what are we missing? Okay, so let's pause that thought. What are we missing? Let's talk about systematic errors. So systematic errors. Quite a few years back, 2003, the Health and Safety Executive conducted a research. They wanted to understand what were the drivers of failures in industry that were associated or kind of caused by control systems. And they looked at a sample of 34 incidents and looked at the primary causes of incidents that were actually claimed as this is what led to the issue, to the event. Their findings shed a huge amount of light on where the problems actually appear or live. More than 60% of failures were already built into the safety-related systems before they actually started, before they're taken into service. You can see there 44% is specification issues, 15% on design and implementation, 6% on installation and commissioning. Operations and maintenance, usually the teams that bear the brunt of why it went wrong, only 15%. Changes after commissioning, and most of the changes were changes that were poorly managed, responsible for 20%. Now, this is telling us something, but what is it telling us? Because as part of all these stages, there is a numerical aspect to it, but it's kind of telling us there's more to it. There's something else that seems to slip at these stages, and that seems to stay within the system design and the system performance that then affects it when we need it the most. So if we can't have safety in our numbers and can't have that warm fuzzy feeling in our numbers, what can we do? Is it reasonable for us to assume that we're focusing on numbers and we shouldn't do it? It's already complex enough to do systems engineering, and we're not putting numbers to it. Well, that's why should we just focus on doing what we know is the right thing and hope it's enough? You know, there's loads of guidance there on how to do the right thing, and we could just do that, and, you know, fingers crossed, we won't be unlucky. Well, someone from Google said it best: hope is not a strategy. All of us will deal with the necessity for having a strategy to manage risk, to manage availability, to manage performance, and hope is definitely not one that I've seen quoted as an effective one. Okay, so we're saying numbers didn't play a significant part, and hope is not going to help us. So what is? What we have is a need for a structured approach to those aspects of the standard that can't be quantified. And that's not just 615, 08, and 11 or any other functional safety standards. That is for engineering standards. We're going to use 615, 08 to illustrate how that was achieved, 615, 08 and 615, 11 to illustrate how that was achieved for functional safety. 615.11 life cycle, which you're seeing right now on your screen, is a life cycle that's defined to address those aspects that you've seen a couple of slides back that were identified as the root causes for incidents. And if you're familiar with the standard and the life cycle, you'll know what it says. But if you look at the diagram without just triggering the immediate, it's 615.11, we know what it's about. What it's telling you is there's activities that should always be conducted throughout the development of any safety instrumented system. Some of them are continuously performed, like the management aspects, which include competence, which include how you actually, your strategy from start to finish, how you do your audits to confirm you're complying with the requirements of that management structure, and your functional safety assessments to confirm that you're maintaining alignment with the standard. Your planning, how you propose to do it versus how you actually do it. Your verification loops that happen every time you do something, and you either get it checked or you confirm it meets the requirements set on a previous stage, or you confirm that your inputs and outputs are as you expected. Those should be happening consistently throughout the development of your system. And then there's discrete steps. And those discrete steps start at a hazard and risk assessment, then allocation of safety functions, then specification, design, installation, commissioning, validation, operation, maintenance, modification, and eventually decommissioning. That structured approach is there to address exactly what we've been talking about. For example, hazard and risk assessment. If you quantify your hazard and risk assessment, you define a risk gap of some sort, and you have a quantitative target. In that assessment, there's a whole lot more than just that number. There will be a number of protection layers or safeguards that you've claimed, that you know now that they have a role to play in keeping you safe. But also, there's an interaction between those and your safety function that you need to understand. As you allocate that safety function as a protective layer, you are effectively saying, I need to know now what that safety function needs to do. So you need to specify it. And the specification has very little in terms of risk target type of figures, apart from this is what we think we need, this is what we think we will get. And everything else is about understanding what the functionality needs to be, how it interacts with other things, and how you're proposing to maintain that functionality through the life of your system. That then needs to be carried to the design and engineering of that system, and it needs to be confirmed with regards to meeting that specification. And that there's almost an invisible loop between installation and commissioning and validation and the safety requirement specification. That then gives you that warm fuzzy feeling that when you press the start button, you know it will do what it needs to do when it needs to do it. But that's not enough. You need to look after it during the operation maintenance phase. And if you make any changes, guess what? You start from the beginning. You make sure that your hazard risk assessment is still valid, etc., etc., etc. So this is nothing new. So why is it so important? Well, it gives you a structured approach to start with. It clearly identifies verification of what you're doing as a requirement and the validation against your specification as a mandatory activity. So when we saw on that pie chart that there was a specification issue, but also there was some installation and commissioning issues, but also there was operations and maintenance, they're all linked together. The verification and validation weeds out those issues. It also forces you to look at proven approaches to development of systems, because nothing that's on that life cycle is new. We've been doing systems engineering for many, many decades, and each one of those steps has been used in industry one way or another for those many years. So it's nothing new. And it also specifically tells you what you need to do to manage that process, to ensure that you are looking for the right things, doing the right activities, and implementing the right practices to weed out those things that might go wrong. And yes, there is some numbers in there too. There's your PFD calculations, but by and large, the majority of the standard is not about the PFD. So what we're really talking about is weeding out systematic failure. So what's a systematic failure? 61508 defines it as a failure related in a deterministic way to a certain cause, meaning it doesn't depend on any other cause, which can only be eliminated by a modification of the design or manufacturing processes, operational procedures, documentation, or other relevant factors. Note that it's saying it can be eliminated, not reduced. It can be eliminated by changing how we designed it, how we've manufactured it, how we use it, how we manage it, or how we let people use it. These are all things we don't typically put numbers to, but if you address the issue, it will not come back. Okay, a good example is an error in the tag of a cable between a sensing element and a logic solver. During planning and the planning of the installation commissioning, there was an installation plan and the cable tag was 1, 2, 3, 4, and someone put the wrong tag on the wrong cable. When you tested that cable, you confirmed the functionality of that cable, but it's connected to the wrong thing. We need to find a way to confirm that that error is not now going to carry into operational phase, because it might have actually defeated the system to respond the way you expected it. So what we do, we validate to the safety requirement specification. And if that cable is not letting the system do what you wanted it to do in the first place, you'll pick that up then. What will you do? You'll wrap the hand of whoever put the tag in the wrong place. You'll change the tag. The error is gone. You'll retest it. You'll confirm that it's operating correctly. We're good to go. That failure will not come back. There's a number of notes in the standard that give you other examples. On a safety requirement specification, you could have someone saying that the high-level trip should actuate at 95% of the level in a tank. But what they meant to say is they actually wanted it to actuate at 95% of the calibrated range, which might not be the same thing. So these are the things we can't put numbers in. These are the things that people introduce into processes, and they sit, those errors sit in the process, they sit in the design, they sit in the performance of the system, and at the right time, when you need it to do what you wanted it to do, it won't. 615.11 also defines systematic failure in a very similar way. Failure related to a pre-existing fault which consistently occurs under particular conditions and which can only be eliminated by removing the fault by modification design, manufacturing process, operating procedures, documentation, other relevant factors. Bugs. We refer to them as bugs. Both standards are basically saying the same thing. It's a fault that's been introduced, it's an error, and will happen every time that condition happens. And if you modify the design of the process and address that cause for that fault, it will go away. It will not come back. Okay, so at the beginning I told you that, right, hope is not a strategy, numbers are not the be all and end all, and now I've told you that people put errors in systems. So I can't trust people, I can't trust the numbers, and I can't hope that things go well. So what can we do? Yeah, so let's talk about it. Systematic capability. Systematic capability is an aspect, a concept that's introduced by 61508. And it quantifies in 4 bands, systematic capability 1 to 4, the confidence that the system safety development has the best we can weed out, prevent, control, avoid any errors, any bugs that would affect the safety function. Okay, it does that by looking at the measures that you put in place during specification, design, hazard analysis, installation and commissioning, validation, management, auditing, functional safety assessments. All those things are measures to identify issues that could become systematic issues. 511 also defines systematic capability. This might come as a surprise to you, because most of the times people think 61511 only talks about PFDs and some stuff you need to do, but it's actually there. There's systematic capability for any function that claims a safety integrity level. And it pretty much says the same as 61508, apart from the reference to the device safety manual. 61511 deals with integrated systems. So what they're saying is, if the device is compliant with 61508, there's a safety manual. It should tell you what you need to do to maintain that capability, plus the other stuff you need to do when you integrate stuff together. So what does that really mean? What in real life, what does that mean? Well, what it means is there's specific package of measures and techniques quoted within 61508 mostly, that give you that assurance that your safety system will perform as you expect it to. These include adequate project management, adequate configuration management. Just a quick note to say configuration management is not version control. Version control is part of configuration management. Configuration management is a strategy to ensure that you're using the right information at the right time. Competency management, including task competency requirements. Planning and execution of defined lifecycle activities. Stage gate assessments, your functional safety assessments. Verification and validation, including during the operational phase, validating that what you have is doing what it should be doing and it's meeting your estimates. Testing. What's the scope of your test, the depth of your test, boundaries, etc. Ongoing monitoring and auditing and change management during all phases. Change management is not after operations and maintenance. Change management should happen at each stage of 61511. As a change on a design, for whatever reason, should be revalidated against the safety requirement specification. The same for installation and commissioning, the same during operations and maintenance. And there's some statistical probabilistic analysis that you can do also to say, oh, there's a target failure measure, and my design meets it, which is your PFD. So in 61508, there's a number of tables where you can actually see if your techniques are meeting the requirement for SIL, for the SIL that you're claiming for that function. So for example, if you have a device that says, I've got, it's SIL2 capable, and you wanted to look, and it has some ASICs in it, and in your design, you're considering using, as part of the evidence for compliance, that you use a schematic entry rather than VHDL simulation. If you look at that table in the middle, point 3, schematic entry is not recommended for any SIL. It's not recommended for any safety integrity level, but a simulation is highly recommended for all of them. So if you're using simulation, VHDL simulation for an ASIC that's been designed, that's good. That's one measure that will contribute to your systematic capability. It also talks about how effective they are. Project management, for example, on the table on your left. If you have a project management plan that says, this is what we're going to do, this is who's going to do it, there's a schedule, resource allocation, talks about training, and there's some checks after modifications, that's probably low effectiveness. If your project management plan includes independent validation, if it includes ongoing monitoring of the project, if there's a standardized validation procedure, good configuration management, failure statistics, computer data design, and software engineering, that's high effectiveness. And depending on what SIL you're claiming, you might have to do one or the other. And some other examples on the right-hand side for modification, protection, etc. These tables in 61508 are there to guide people to what they need to do to claim capability within a device, but it gives you a clear line of sight to what 61511 is trying to do with systematic capability. Because if 61508 is claiming that a device to be adequate for use in a safety function with a SIL requirement, this has to be done, then 61511 is saying, okay, if you can't have a device that's SIL capable, meaning hasn't been independently verified as that, as a minimum, you should be going and checking that these measures are in place, whether it's in the development of the device or as you're integrating it or as you're putting it to use. So your brain's probably spinning a bit and thinking, bloody hell, it's a bit too much. So not only I have to calculate PFDs and make sure that the design meets that, now I have to think about all this stuff. But how do I know what I need to do and what information I need to put together? Well, the process is pretty straightforward, but it's been kind of blinded by our focus on the first part of the life cycle, the SIL determination. So there's a table that tells you what a SIL is, and depending on the demand mode you're applying to your system, it could be low demand or high demand, and that will dictate if you're using PFDs or PFHs, probability failure on demand, or average dangerous failures per hour. The strategy to claim you've met it, if you're saying you have a SIL target, you have to demonstrate that your hardware, your equipment, has a random hardware failure rate that's adequate, your PFD. You have to demonstrate that your hardware fault tolerance is adequate, so that's your architectural constraints. And you have to demonstrate that your systematic safety integrity is adequate. And you do that by developing packages of work for that SIL based on 61508 or 11, or selecting a different route like proven in use in 61508 or prior use in 61511. So I'm going to walk you through a typical, well, a conceptual example. So you've done your LOPA, you've got your target, which tells you you're in one of those 4 bands, and your PFD sits within one of those 4 bands. That gives you your SIL. Once you know your SIL, you know where your systematic safety integrity needs to be. So if it's SIL 1, the target based on your LOPA, you need to demonstrate systematic capability 1. And systematic capability 1 will have a number of things you need to do. If you're doing it with regards to a device, it will be defined in 61508 and the tables therein. If it's 61511, it's ensuring that not only you're selecting the right equipment, but that you've kind of observed the requirements of the life cycle and the activities, management activities, functional safety assessments, verification, etc., to satisfy that SIL 1 capability, and that you can support that through the life. Okay, so that's the gateway. Your LOPA gives you a number to open the door to the non-numerical aspect of the standard, which is in reality the reason why the standard exists, because we've done reliability calculations for many decades. What we haven't done very well is making sure that other errors don't go and basically undermine that reliability, availability, and integrity calculation that we feel we need to do. So, in short, instead of safety in numbers, in our risk targets, our safety integrity is in good recognized engineering practices, in adequate competence management, in adequate planning, verification and validation of the activities you take to do, to develop and to deliver that safety system against the specific requirements you've defined for that system, with a structured modular approach to execution of each one of these tasks, and appropriate use of mathematical tools to support the application of the points above. So safety in our overall ability to demonstrate that not only we understand the targets, but we understand that the targets are there to guide us to everything else that needs to be in place to make sure that those systems are available and will do what we need them to do. Thank you very much for listening to me rant on about this, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions.